What's up, metal and heavy music fans? It's Flight of Icarus again with MetalTrenches.com, and today we are ranking industrial metal bands. And hey, if you like to be kept up to date with the best and brightest metal bands and albums from the underground and above, then stick with me by hitting that subscribe button down below. Alright, this is obviously not an exhaustive or complete list by any means. There are all sorts of things that I could have included on here that I didn't. I kind of just stuck to the bands that I felt are sort of the biggest and had the most impact on me in some way, or the ones I could just talk about. So if you're here to complain and say, how could you forget so-and-so, like, there's the door. We don't need you. So jumping right in though, I'm going to start with a low-end tier one with Deadsy. I actually saw this band open for, I believe, Taproot back in Chicago, way back in the day. And yeah, they're not good. They're not good. I'm going to put them at D tier. A lot of people in the audience were describing them as whiny Orgy. I don't like to be that mean, but a little bit accurate there. I was also, anytime I go mini golfing, I think of Deadsy, because they had those little like white chain link necklaces, and it looks like the chains from the mini golf courses. Moving on to another one that's not so hot, but not terrible. Dope. I went through a pretty substantial Dope phase. I enjoyed them quite a bit for a while. Not so much anymore. I still like the first album, Felons and Revolutionaries. It's got some good cuts on it. It's still on my shelf. But the other two I've since traded. And yeah, their later tier stuff is not so great. I'm going to put them at C tier. Jumping to a newer band on this list, we've got Author and Punisher, and this guy, you know, he deserves credit just for the innovation factor, if nothing else. Just crafting and machining his own instruments is pretty awesome. And then as far as the music goes, pretty solid. Not perfect. There's some albums I like a lot more than others, like Milk and Honig was actually like one of my favorite albums of that entire year. But then some of the other ones that some people really love, like Drone Machines, just don't like catch me as much. The latest one was pretty good. I'm going to put this one at about B tier. Obviously, they don't have quite the same legendary status as some of the bands that we're going to be talking about, so I think that's a fair placement for them for now. For him, I should say. All right, Frontline Assembly. I'm going to go ahead and put them at A tier. I know plenty of people would put them at S tier. They're obviously very influential, very important for the industrial movement. Definitely a band that comes up quite a bit. But yeah, I just never got into them quite as much as, say, like Ministry or Skinny Puppy, which we're going to be talking about. So just short of top tier for me. And speaking of which, let's talk about Skinny Puppy. I love Skinny Puppy, and will use any excuse that I can to talk about them. I have a tier list exclusively for Skinny Puppy albums. They belong at S tier. I consider them more of a straight industrial band as opposed to an industrial metal band, but if Ministry's on the list, they need to be included too. Like I feel like they kind of go hand in hand. They've even sort of worked together on various things. Jorgensen actually does guitar on the album Rabies. They have so many great albums though. Too Dark Park, Vivisect. I could go on and on. I have all their albums on my shelf. Some astute viewers have noticed that they're right up here. They saw the Brap cover. Thought that was cool that they picked that out. But yeah, I could gush on and on about them, but suffice it to say S tier. They've been so consistent over the years, and even their newer stuff is pretty solid. Rob Zombie, and I kind of grouped them also in with White Zombie. Didn't separate them out. Obviously, a lot of important albums here. The earlier stuff in particular, I really enjoy. I love the mixture of kind of the rock, the sludge, the industrial elements, the kind of like new metal-y elements here and there. Dragula, big part of my childhood for sure. I remember hearing that song quite a bit. Their later stuff is just sort of like, okay, it's not as good. The newest album was fun. It's about like half really solid songs and half just sort of okay. But yeah, for that inconsistency, I think I'd put Rob at like a B. I think he's still pretty influential for like the modern age of industrial metal. And highly respect his hustle with all the other things that he's able to do artistically. But yeah, Rob Zombie, B tier. KMFDM, another pretty legendary band. Very inconsistent if you ask me. There are certain albums and certain songs I love to death. We were actually just talking about them recently because we were watching the music video for one of their tracks from the old Mortal Kombat soundtrack. It's actually on the Mortal Kombat Annihilation soundtrack, which is full of bangers. I gotta tell you, that movie sucks, but it is a good time, and the soundtrack is kicking.
Too bad you will die.
But yeah, I feel like some tracks just incredible, love them, and then others super cheesy and maybe like even kind of on purpose in some points. There's some like satirical elements of their sound, but yeah, a little bit middle of the road for me. But still highly influential, still very important. I'm gonna put them at B tier as well. All right, Marilyn Manson. We're not gonna get into like personal stuff here. I'm just gonna stick to the music. Obviously, I'd say like the first 3 core albums, they're just unmissable albums, if you ask me. There's a reason why I included the first album on my Industrial Metal for Dummies list, too. Like, very important stuff, very solid songs, interesting songwriting, taking things in kind of a different, unique direction that I really respect. The later stuff's got its moments, too. It's not quite as good, but I could kind of teeter between an A and B tier on this one. I think I'm going to put them at A tier for now and see if I change my mind later. Fear Factory. Got to talk about Fear Factory. The only band on this list I would say that is also basically like a thrash metal band in most areas. I recently went back and re-listened to their full discography in preparation for my Fear Factory album tier list. And a lot of bangers, but also some kind of lulls in there. Also very influential, I would say. I'm going to go ahead and put Fear Factory at A tier in this list, I think. Pitchshifter, another one that shows up on the Mortal Kombat Annihilation soundtrack with Genius. That was my introduction to this band. That is a banger of a track that you need to hear if you have not already, and that whole album is excellent. www.pitchshifter.com. Unfortunately, the rest of the albums I could kind of take or leave. They have sort of a different sound that is not as good. Past that, so I'm going to put Pitchshifter at C tier. But that album, if we were ranking like industrial metal albums, I would put that up at A tier at least. All right, one of the only like blackened bands on this list, we have Anaal Nathrakh. Excellent band, very unique twist on this genre. One of the most unique sounding bands on this entire list, I would say, and just doing their own thing. I have said my piece on some of their albums that I think are highly overrated. Like, I thought their most recent one at the time of recording this was just kind of okay, even though people were raving about it. Still above average, still solid stuff, but not the masterpiece people are talking about. The Whole of the Law is everything to me, though. Like, to me, that's their best album. But very cool fusion. Not quite as influential maybe as some of these other bands. And again, that consistency is kind of middling around. I would put them at B tier, I think. I could see them maybe sliding into A tier, but don't want to overpack the higher tiers. Want to leave them for the absolute ballers, so to speak. Three Teeth, another more recent industrial band. Probably my favorite modern industrial band kicking around today. They have been pretty darn consistent. Each album seems to get just a bit better than the last one. They got to tour with Tool because Alexis just on a whim like randomly made friends at a wedding with the guitar player, and they've been buds ever since. And so that was kind of a cool story. I had Alexis on the podcast and he talked about that if you want to hear him talk about it more. But as far as Three Teeth goes, whew, boy, I could almost put them at A tier. Again, they don't have quite the influence yet, but I see them becoming like an absolute powerhouse in the genre. They're, to me, like the new Marilyn Manson, the new Nine Inch Nails. I'm going to put them at B tier for now, though. All right, American Head Charge, another lower tier one from the kind of new metal era of things. I like American Head Charge, especially their first album. The second album's pretty decent, too, in some places. But still pretty low level. I'm going to put them at C tier. They've definitely got some bangers, but they don't belong in this kind of above average tier with these heavyweights. Motionless in White, another band that I had not really listened to in full, but I just recently did their tier list, so I listened to all their albums for the first time. Was kind of surprised with what I liked and what I didn't. Their newer albums definitely have more of that industrial metal kind of Marilyn Manson vibe to them. But unfortunately, I also just don't really like their newer stuff as much. I think the middle album was the most enjoyable of their more industrial phase stuff to me. I'm going to put them at C tier, which I know the Motionless in White fans are pretty diehard out there. So they're going to be out for my blood for that one. But that's just the way that I feel, and I just feel like it's fair within the context of these other bands. All right, Rammstein, excellent. Pretty darn consistent, too. I've done a Rammstein tier list. Very much enjoy their albums, especially, again, the first three, Mutter being my absolute favorite personally, but I also love Sehnsucht. And also another band on this list to be on the Mortal Kombat Annihilation soundtrack, wouldn't you know it? I could see them being at A tier or S tier, but kind of looking at my list here, I feel like I'm going to go ahead and put them at S tier. They're among my favorites out of all of them, the ones that I re-listen to the most. They've got this great balance, too, of making things that are, like, mainstream appealing, but then also like weird and crazy and out there and very cool stuff. Gonna leave them at S tier. Powerman 5000, D tier. Not particularly good. I will say When Worlds Collide is a banger, like unironically. That is a great song. It's just a well-written song. I had a lot of fun with it, going all the way back to, God, I was in probably like middle school when that came out, maybe even a little bit earlier. Remember hearing it a lot on the Tony Hawk soundtrack on many an afternoon in the basement. But yeah, overall, not the greatest band. Definitely belong at the lower end of this list. Godflesh, legendary. I think I'm going to put them at S tier as well. I hear so many sludge bands and industrial bands and bands from completely different genres too. Like, I can't tell you how many times, even this year, I've been like, oh yeah, and this part had this like Godflesh vibe to it. You know, going back to Street Cleaner, love that track, like Rats. And then even like their more modern stuff that they put out too has been incredibly consistent and just grungy and rough and ugly and incredible. Awesome. Great band. Nine Inch Nails. There was a time where Nine Inch Nails for a long time was actually among my like top 3 favorite bands of all time, as you can see. People reference those records there all the time. I have all of their like classic albums on my shelf. I've stopped collecting the newer ones because that's the thing for me that makes them teeter a little bit is I don't really like much of their newer stuff. Everything up through The Fragile, and The Fragile is actually one of my favorites from them. It's always kind of a toss-up between that and The Downward Spiral. Got a Nine Inch Nails tier list if you want to check that out too. But yeah, their later stuff with Teeth is pretty solid. Year Zero hasn't really aged as well for me when I go back and listen to it. And then everything beyond that, like Hesitation Marks just bores me to death except for like the lead single. So that sort of brought them down in my eyes a bit, where I kind of for many years, like my 16-year-old self would like kick me in the head for not putting them at S tier, but I kind of wanted to put them at A tier. I feel like they've kind of like damaged the legacy a little bit. I almost wish that Trent had just made good on basically what he said, was that he was kind of done with them, more or less, and that project. He's doing great work on soundtracks and stuff. It's like just do that. Leave Nine Inch Nails alone. Like, the angst and just what made Nine Inch Nails, I feel like is not necessarily there anymore. And that's just my opinion. But, you know, it's whatever. I think I'm going to put them at A tier. Ministry. Another tough one, too, because extremely influential. Very important for industrial and industrial metal. But kind of inconsistent. Another one where, like, the first 3 albums, I would say, especially, like, The Mind is a Terrible Thing to Taste. That track Psalm 69 is just epic in every sense of the word. And even like Filth Pig, I love the like groove and ugliness and kind of sludginess of that one. But then their later stuff kind of take it or leave it. So I don't know. I'm sort of on the fence with them in terms of where to put them at either A or S tier. I like to keep S tier pretty concise. So I think I'm going to actually put Ministry at A tier, just for the kind of consistency issues. Strapping Young Lad. Great band. Saw them perform live at, I believe, the first Sounds of the Underground tour. And lots of, Devin Townsend can basically almost do no wrong. Never got into them as much. And I don't feel like they're necessarily... people in the comments are going to rage if I say they're not as influential. But I'd say not as influential as some of these other bands. They're definitely influential. But... I saw a funny video recently of back when he had hair, kind of mocking people at a metal show about how they're all going bald and they should just shave their head. And then it was just sort of a montage from there on out of him losing his hair. I guess karma hit him pretty hard. But in any case, I'm going to put Strapping Young Lad at B tier. Dawn of Ashes, another newer band in the genre, and the other kind of more blackened vibe band. And they are another one where every album has been getting better and better. I've been interested watching them. I included them in my best new industrial metal bands list, and people seem to enjoy them. Again, they don't have the influence or the like discography behind them yet, so I'm going to put them at B tier as well, but I'll be interested to see if they rise above the pack. Static X, another kind of inconsistent one for me. Wisconsin Death Trip is like an S tier industrial metal album. And then they came back with Cannibal too, and after kind of the weirdness, I love that album. That's almost like Wisconsin Death Trip too. You got Machine. You got some really solid albums, but also some kind of like middle of the road sort of albums too. Again, for the inconsistency, I'm going to put them at B tier. May Wayne Static, rest in peace. One of a kind vocalist, one of a kind look. Just his voice, his hair, the whole package, rock star. He will be greatly missed. Orgy, another one. I'm going to put Orgy at C tier. I actually really like their first album still. I'll occasionally bang to that Blue Monday cover that they do. And I love the like closing track too with the like dum dum daddy daddy dum dum. My inner like angsty teenager comes out when I listen to that one. And the opening track too, it's a pretty consistent album, but their later stuff gets pretty bad, we'll just say. So C tier. And then Filter, Hey Man, Nice Shot alone. Like that's an S tier industrial metal anthem, gotta say. But yeah, they kind of run the gamut. They've been more of sort of just a straight rock band lately. Some of the later singles are actually okay. But yeah, not great, not terrible, not on like the Powerman 5000 Deadsy level, but I'm going to put Filter at C. And that is it. Just for these bands, again, there's plenty more I could include on here, like Hansel and Gretel, and yeah, there's any number of other bands people could list out. If you want to like ask me where I'd rank one of those bands instead of just being like, you forgot this band, so you're terrible. If you want to do that, you can feel free to do that. But yeah, I've got a whole playlist of these, so stick around, check those out. I've also got full album reviews and new releases. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.